concerned about trying to set up your boundaries? Well, in this video, we're going to talk about setting boundaries, and this is going to be a live Q&A. If you are watching the video live or you happen to be watching the replay, please feel free to put any questions you have as it relates to setting boundaries in the comments below so that we can talk about them. I know that boundaries and being able to set boundaries is a challenge for many individuals as leaders. And I'll share with you a couple of insights and strategies that have helped me to be able to develop those boundaries when I needed them. And I'll share with you a couple strategies that have helped my clients as well, in hopes that you will feel a lot more comfortable about setting boundaries. Now, you want to watch this video until the end because I'm going to share with you over 20 years worth of expertise and experience that I have had in very friendly and very contentious situations that will help you be able to start navigating this situation a lot easier. Now, I want to know from you, how many of you have been in a situation where you know you needed to set a boundary, but you were a little bit afraid to do it? Put it in the comments below. Let's talk about it. There's a couple reasons why boundaries are so difficult for people to want to adapt or implement. And there's a lot of reasons why. But before I go into those, I do want to say if you are new to me, welcome. And if you are one of my amazing subscribers, welcome back, friend. This channel heavily focuses in on advanced communication skills and strategies that will help you to communicate more confidently and concisely under pressure. If you happen to be in some very high stakes, high pressure situations, this is the absolute best channel for you to be a part of on YouTube. Now, the reason why people tend to struggle with setting boundaries is because there's multiple reasons. But one of the ones I'm going to talk about today is that there is a bit of fear that sometimes people experience in setting boundaries. Now, as I mentioned at the very beginning of this video, I shared with you that a lot of times people are just simply afraid of setting boundaries. They are not quite sure of what's going to happen after they set the boundary. If you've been in that situation, let me share with you why you may be a little bit afraid to set boundaries. Now, what happens when you are setting a boundary? That is a conversation that I would automatically categorize as a conversation that is going to go under pressure. And many people do not like being under pressure, which is the reason why you see so many leaders feeling very comfortable in terms of what they're saying. Most leaders can communicate, but when the conversation goes under pressure, things change a little bit. Now, before I go into this more, I want to say hello and welcome to those of you watching the live today. Let me know in the comments below if you have ever been in a situation where you were a bit worried about setting boundaries as a leader. Maybe you are a woman in leadership and you are in a role and you need to set some boundaries and you're not quite exactly sure how to do it. Maybe you're a man in leadership and you're working with your teams and you know you need to set some boundaries also, but for some reason it's just not happening. Let's talk about it in the comments below. And let me know what part of the big, beautiful world you all are joining from today. People are afraid to set boundaries. They're very, very afraid to set boundaries quite a bit. And when they are afraid to set those boundaries, what happens is they tend to not want to go in a conversation under pressure. How many of you would go into a conversation that you know is going to be hard? How many of you would do it? Your answer says a lot. Now, there's some of us, like myself and many other people, that are very comfortable being in very hard conversations. But for the most part, most people, they don't want to be in a contentious conversation. They don't want to be in a conversation that could potentially be a bit more challenging than what they expected, which is the reason why a lot of times people will shy away from setting boundaries because they know intuitively that setting a boundary is basically telling this person that you need to communicate with that there is something that you need support with, or maybe something that they are doing that is impacting you in perhaps not the best way. How many of you have been in situations where you have set boundaries and things went really well? And how many of you have been in situations where you set boundaries and things did not go as well as you'd like for them to go? Let's talk about it in the comments below. As I mentioned, many times people are just simply afraid of setting those boundaries. They're not quite sure of what they want to do. They're just worried about the interaction. They don't know what to expect. And typically, as individuals, we don't want to function in the unknown, right? We do not like to be in situations where we just don't know what's going to happen. We have no idea, which is the reason why setting boundaries can sometimes be so hard. Now, one of the strategies that I do, and what I do with my clients, and I have done directly with myself, is that when you find yourself in those situations where you are struggling with setting a boundary, the very first important thing that you have to identify is what boundary specifically do you need to set? You would be surprised on how many people will say, I need to set boundaries, I need to set boundaries. But until they're actually able to articulate what boundaries specifically they need to set, they will continue to live in the world of confusion. Now, there are 5 boundaries that I talked about at length in December of 2025. If you go to my live tab, you will see boundaries, 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 boundaries. That is what we talk about specifically. And if you take some time, we talk about 5. There's a lot of boundaries, but we're going to talk about 5 specifically. There's the time boundary, the money boundary, the energy boundary, the personal boundary, and the professional boundary. Those are the boundaries you want to keep in mind. And we're going to talk a little bit more about some other strategies that will help you. If you want to go into more detail on those boundaries specifically, then take a look at the live tab that talks about any video that talks about boundaries, and you'll be able to pick it up from there. I want to say hello to Lindsay Greenknop. Hello, welcome, welcome. How are you doing today? And as we mentioned, know what your boundaries are. What are they? Is there something that you need to do specifically as it relates to your schedule or your time that if you are not able to complete a task at a certain time, it may make it very hard for you to accomplish this next goal? I want to say hello to Zayden Barnes. Hello, Zayden. How are you doing today? Welcome, welcome. Now, as I mentioned, the first strategy I would say is that you have to know specifically what boundaries you need. Now, for those of you watching the live, let me know what boundaries do you feel like you are struggling with right now as a leader. Tell me exactly what are some challenges you're facing in setting boundaries. I would be more than happy to give you some insight to help you be able to set those boundaries while we are in a live session today. This is Q&A. So for those of you who are perhaps new to my channel, this channel is here to help you be able to communicate at a higher level than your peers. And I will guarantee you that you will learn something from this channel that will make you stand out from everybody else. You may be able to negotiate a higher salary. You may be able to transition to another job. You may be able to start your business, and etc. So let me know what challenges you have as it relates to setting boundaries or anything as it relates to communicating as a professional, and I will give you some insight that will completely change your mindset and change your life. All right, I want to say hello to Amanda Jimenez 8330. Hello, Amanda. How you doing today? We have World of Free Speech. Hello, welcome, World. How are you doing today? First strategy is you have to know what your boundaries are. And second strategy is going to be, now you know what your boundaries are, you have to be able to communicate those boundaries. Now, I want to know from you if you've ever struggled with boundaries or you're struggling with a situation where you know you need to set boundaries, then put in the comments below. Let's talk about it. When it comes down to communicating those boundaries, there's a couple things that have to come into mind. One of the things that you want to do as it relates to communicating boundaries is to understand that there's going to be a change in the dynamics of the conversations that you have with this particular person. Now, many people, as I mentioned, they're afraid of the unknown when it comes to boundaries. And I'm going to talk to you a bit about a couple of strategies that can help you be able to set those boundaries but not be the person that people think are being rude or perhaps are being too aggressive or not wanting to work with the team and etc. Let me go to chat. Robert, hello, Robert. High five, friend. Good to see you, Robert. How are you? I know it's been a while. Robert says, hi, Robert here, having a couple of questions. Robert, you know, I'm here for you, friend, and this is Q&A. Ask away, friend. I'm here to support you any way that I can. While we're waiting for a couple questions from Robert, as I mentioned, the communication style and how you communicate your boundaries is critically important. Now, there's a lot of things we've talked about earlier this week. We've talked about influence, and we have touched on boundaries a bit. I remember having a conversation with Chaz Man of Culture as it relates to boundaries. So I'm going to highlight really briefly how you can set boundaries without sounding too aggressive or without someone saying you're being rude. One of the things you have to keep in mind is when you are setting those boundaries with other people, your tone of voice really does matter. How many of you have been in a situation where someone is telling you to do something and what they're asking you to do may not be too complicated? However, it's the way they said it, the tone of voice they said whatever it is they needed you to do is what just completely rubbed you the wrong way. I've been in situations like that. And this is the reason why, when you're setting boundaries, you want to be very mindful of the way that you are actually communicating in your tone of voice. Now, you may be asking, well, how can I do that? I have something for you. I talk a lot about setting a baseline on this channel specifically. And when I mean baseline, it means you have to get a understanding in terms of how you communicate on a day-to-day basis when you are simply having a conversation with someone. If you're not familiar with what your baseline is, then one strategy, this is something you can do completely free, is to get your phone and record yourself talking about a topic. Now, I have a specific outline that I do with my clients in terms of how I determine what their baseline is and how we gauge their baseline. But that's something I do in a one on one setting. If you need some support specifically as it relates to that, then contact me at exciteexcellence.org for an executive strategy session, and I will help you do that. Or my high stakes communication intensive. That will completely change your life. You'll hear a lot more about my intensive here very, very soon. So, getting a sense of how do you communicate on a day-to-day basis is really important. Why? Because when you are setting boundaries with someone, if you are speaking to them in your normal tone of voice, the individual that you need to set those boundaries with is not going to think that there is an issue here in terms of the conversation. They're going to go ahead and say, "Oh, okay," and listen to what you have to say. However, if you come into the conversation because you know you need to set a boundary and you start to have a voice that may sound a bit more stern, maybe a bit more authoritative in terms of how it is being delivered, then people automatically will say, "What's going on? Like, what's going on here?" They're going to wonder, why are you talking to me about this boundary? You're talking to me in a very somewhat of aggressive way. I don't understand. And that's where you may get a lot of questions. So when you're communicating your boundaries, keep your baseline tone of voice, the way you communicate with people on a day-to-day basis, the same. Now, the second part I'm going to mention to you while we're waiting for questions to come in is we've talked about this is the part of you communicating your boundaries. The second part is going to be how you are structuring your conversation. Now, if you follow any of my content here, I have a specific way, a specific framework that I use and I share with my clients and I share with my amazing audience here on YouTube in terms of how do you have difficult conversations. When you're setting boundaries, as I mentioned in the beginning of the video, this conversation could potentially go under pressure, and you have to be able to know that and recognize that from the very beginning. If you know this could potentially be a difficult conversation, feel free to take a look at any of my videos that talk about managing or navigating difficult conversations, but I'm going to give you a couple overviews very quickly. When you're having this conversation about setting your boundaries, one of the things you want to do when you are just initially in front of that person, well, one, you want to obviously allocate time for you to have a conversation. So make sure that that person is not interrupted with whatever that may be going on. You are not interrupted with whatever that could be going on in your position or in your businesses, where both parties are at a place where they can completely focus in on what is being said. Many times, what happens, and I'll share this with you from being a C suite executive and being a director, I've been in senior leadership roles for a very long time, is that people will come to you and try to set boundaries at random times in the day. You may be in the middle of something as a leader of an organization. You may be in the middle of a huge project and someone, knocks on the door, knock, knock. I need to talk to you. And you're like, okay, sure. And that person probably has a million things on their mind. And when you come and talk to them about, oh, I need to set this boundary, I need to do this, I need to do that, then you're not getting their full attention. And they are probably in the middle of doing something, which is the reason why you want to make sure you allocate time for this discussion that you're going to have. Now, in terms of how you structure it, I always structure any hard conversations or setting boundaries with the beginning. The beginning is going to be have some type of compliment or some type of acknowledgement that you want to share with the person. If you don't have anything, and maybe it's somebody that you simply do not like working with, then you can say, I appreciate you taking time to speak with me today. Something as simple as that. I appreciate you taking time to speak with me today. And then you can talk about whatever it is you need to do. Now, I'm not going to just let you just hang from there, okay? This is the channel where you will receive the most in depth insights in terms of these high pressured, high stakes conversations on YouTube. There's no other channels like this in a live setting. Now, even though you said, thank you, I appreciate you meeting with me today. So then what happens? What's next? What should you do next? I would preface it by saying that depending on what it is you need to set a boundary on, present some data as to why this boundary you are setting is necessary. So for example, I'll give you one boundary that I had to set. When I was in a senior executive role many years ago, I was in the process of developing my YouTube channel and I was in the process of developing my business. And what happened is that I was required to go to a lot of extracurricular events or stay very, very, very late in the evenings to do certain projects in the role I was in. Now, I, as a leader, was okay with working and doing what I have to do, but I needed to start setting boundaries that I had not set before. So, what did I do? I had a conversation with the person I was working with, who at that time was the individual I was reporting to, and I explained to them the following. One, thank you for having a conversation with me. There's a couple things that I want to have a conversation about as it relates to timing. I believe that there are a few other things that I can probably complete as it relates to my tasks, my role, my responsibilities earlier in the day, but with some changes in my family dynamic. And I'll explain to you why I said that. With some changes in my family dynamic, I need to leave at 5 o'clock. I need to leave at 5 o'clock because I have some things I have to take care of. Now, if you are someone that is a novice in terms of being able to set boundaries, you may feel that little desire to just tell them everything, right? You want to just say, I'm doing this, I'm doing that, I'm doing this. What I'm sharing with you is one of the most common mistakes that people make when they are trying to set boundaries. Because from the very beginning of this live, I mentioned to you that people inherently, most of the time, do not want to interact with conflict. Therefore, when you say you want to set a boundary and you feel like, okay, I have the courage, I'm ready to set this boundary, when we set it, we feel like we have to explain why we set it. We have to tell this person, well, I have this boundary because I have A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, I, J, K, L, M, N, O, P. Like I have all of these things I have to sit there and explain to this person because I'm doing something that I feel inherently is wrong for them. But remember, you have to take care of yourself. So, whatever boundary it is, if it's any of the five that I mentioned, the time boundary, the money boundary, the personal boundary, the professional boundary, and the energy boundary, if it's any one of those boundaries, remember you have to take care of yourself. You have to be able to do this. And communicating this boundary is going to be very important. You do not need to explain yourself when you set the boundary. Say your boundary and just stay quiet. Listen specifically to what they have to say and make sure you read the person because you need to know what's going on. All right, I want to say hello to Trop Mop 7813. Hello, welcome. You want to make sure that you read that person. Now, reading people is a skill within itself. This is not a skill that you just wake up one day and you're like, I can read people. I know how to read people. It does not work like that. Reading people is a advanced level communication skill that you have to truly be guided to understanding how people communicate. Now, one of the things that I have in my high stakes communication intensive, as I mentioned, you're going to hear a lot more about this very soon as I get a couple things together for the landing page for it, is that reading people is something that you can learn and you can be trained to do. Now, what happens a lot of times is that when people are trying to read people, instead of doing what I talk about on the channel in terms of, excuse me, observing them, they just look at someone and they don't truly observe them. So if you need some support, reading people is probably one of the most important skills that I would say you will absolutely want to master if you're truly going to that next level in terms of how you're communicating, how you're negotiating, and etc. in your companies, in your businesses, as a public official, or etc. It's so critically important for you to be able to read people. It will help you not only professionally, it'll help you personally too. All right, let me go to the chat really quickly. Okay, Robert says George is a good employee in my team. He works well with he works well every day, but somehow my manager and George hate each other personally for some reason. My manager told me to corner George, pressure him daily. He told me to give more tasks to George, asked me to criticize him. Okay, I knew you were going to have something else to say. Let's see. Okay, as a team leader, should I listen to my manager or be with George? Robert, you always have some of the best situations to talk about, and I'm so glad that you're here and you're sharing this because this is a really good topic. And Robert, we're going to go into this today for sure because you have a lot of dynamics that you are dealing with in this situation specifically. So let's pull it back and let's go through this and figure out how can we help Robert here to be able to navigate this really challenging situation in terms of what's going on. So there's a lot of different factors that we'll unpack. We're going to start with specifically Robert. I think what we're going to do first, friend, is let's talk about George and your manager. Okay, let's talk about George and your manager. Let's dive into that just a little bit. Okay, and then let's talk about realistically you as a leader because I know you've been promoted. I know you're doing amazing things there, Robert. So let's talk about realistically what exactly it is that you can do as a leader to keep this as objective as possible. And then let's talk about what happens with George. Like, what is that next step with George that you mentioned specifically? So, Robert, once again, good to see you, friend. We're going to dive into this in just a moment. Something came up. Chaz, man of culture, high five, Chaz. Good to see you, friend. Glad you're here today. Chaz, man of culture says, I'm yet to have that covered with my manager waiting for Monday. Okay, so Chaz had a conversation, and Robert, I'm going to get into yours in just a moment. Ches had a situation that I kind of somewhat alluded to earlier in the live. And so, Ches, let me know how things go when you talk to your manager. Just remember what we talked about and just be that very polite, very professional person that I know you are. And let's see what happens with your manager talking about. Okay, Robert, let's dive in, friend. Okay, now, first, do you have any insight on George and the manager? Because I know George has came up a couple times in our lives, and I know you said that there's something going on personally with them for some reason. Now, if you don't know what's going on with them, that's okay. That will not prevent us from going through and figuring out how should you strategically manage this very high stakes situation because this is definitely a very high pressure situation. But if at any point in time, if you start hearing things or understanding what's the dynamic between these two individuals, it will help to give you some insight in terms of what are some things we could potentially do in this situation. Now, your manager is not acting like a manager. So let's just go ahead and say that. Any manager that is telling you to do something that is not ethical and is truly not fair is not acting like a manager at all. So what's happening is that Robert's manager is telling Robert to put pressure on George because Robert's manager does not like George. Robert's manager is saying, Robert, you have to put pressure on George. You have to put more tasks on George, and etc. Now let's determine why exactly is Robert's manager doing this. One, because obviously Robert has already highlighted there's something personal that is going on between George and Robert's manager. And we don't know what specifically that dynamic is, but we know there's something personal going on with the two of them. Now, what Robert's manager is doing is he is trying his best to make sure that George quits. He wants George to quit. Anytime you're in a situation, friends, when you have a manager that is suddenly just putting tasks on you, they're making you do extra work and things like that, they're trying to get you to leave your job. Now, many people will probably say, why would you say that? Don't say that. But I'm just telling you what really happens on the back end. And people do mean and not nice things like that all the time. And this is what I don't want you to do specifically. So, your manager, Robert, is trying to definitely get rid of George in some type of way. Now, for him, the part I don't like about the situation, and Ches, I'm gonna look at your comment in just one quick second. The part about this conversation that I don't like that's happening with Robert is that Robert's manager is telling Robert to put more work on George, make George work harder, give George more tasks to do, watch him daily. Why does Robert have to do that? Now, if some of your job description is to monitor this particular person, and I know you mentioned before he works very well every day as it relates to George, then why do you have to put all this pressure on him? Now, what I would do, and I would be as objective as I can, and I know, Robert, we've talked about HR before in the past, but what I would do specifically in this situation is whatever George is supposed to do in his role, then that is what he should be evaluated by. He should not be evaluated by the amount of work that Robert can give to him because George says so. He should be not evaluated on how much pressure Robert can put on him because George said so, because Robert's manager said so. That's not fair. So to protect yourself, Robert, I would do your role specifically and focus in on what specifically it is that you need to do. Because there's there comes a time in any leader's journey when you end up being in a situation or a scenario where you face this ethical dilemma such as Robert is mentioning here. And I would always say you will not go wrong by doing the right thing. You will go wrong by doing the wrong thing. And many times what happens is that leaders will feel that pressure, right? That pressure from Robert's boss to make George work, work, work. And then they cave to that pressure, and then something happens, and either George reports somebody to HR, or George, something happens with George, then it comes back to Robert, then it goes back to Robert's manager. I have seen so many times over the past 20 years in senior executive roles when people do not do the right thing, it always comes back. Sometimes you may not see it, but it does come back. So I would say, Robert, evaluate George based on what he's supposed to be evaluated on. You've already said George works very well, he works very hard. Then what else does George need to do? And so when your manager is talking to you and trying to ask you questions about what is George doing, what is the work that he's doing, he should be doing a million things while everybody else is doing too, then I would say, based on his job description of what George is supposed to be doing, he's doing everything correctly. And I would just say quiet, because that's the right thing to do, Robert. The right thing to do is to say George is doing well on the areas that he has is supposed to be evaluated on. He's doing what he's supposed to do correctly. I know this is going to sound a little bit hard, but there's a right way and a wrong way to be managers. And your manager, Robert, is the reason why we have bad managers out there. And I tell you that as a friend because we've been interacting for a long time here. But I just think it's a really tough situation that your manager is putting you in to make you do something like that. Now, if things start to escalate, now you know I'm always thinking about, well, what's going to happen next? If you start communicating to your manager, Robert, and you say, "Manager, I've evaluated George. George is doing what he is supposed to be doing. He's meeting his KPIs or his metrics or the project or whatever the case may be, and your manager still says that's not good enough, he has to do more," then you may need to have a conversation with your human resources team, because he's putting you in a situation that is definitely not healthy of the workplace, and it is putting you in a place of stress and almost borderline just aggressiveness to make you make someone else's life hard. Now, always have that in the back of your mind. If he tries to push back, then you know you have to escalate. So I would just tell him George is doing what he's supposed to be doing. You're not taking sides for George. You are being objective as your role as a leader to say George is doing this and he is being evaluated by these metrics. He's doing very well. This is what I have to report on him. If your manager tries to push back and says, no, 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 you got to give him more work to do, I would try to ask him, can I would do this. Now, this is me. If you're not comfortable doing it, then don't do it. I don't want you to do anything that makes you feel uncomfortable. But I would ask why. Can you help me understand, or if can you give me some insight in terms of why he needs to do more? And I wouldn't say anything, Robert. And the reason why I say it is because your manager will more than likely he will say something. He's going to say something because this topic of making George work is a highly emotional topic for him, and he's already frustrated with George for whatever reasons, and he may just be on that emotional edge to where he slips up and says something. Now, I don't encourage you to make somebody get to the emotional edge. Your manager's already there, but that doesn't mean you can't use that information as knowledge for you to know exactly what's going on so you can make the best decision for yourself moving forward. So if he pushes back, Robert, ask him to give you some insights in terms of why does can you explain to me why George needs to do a bit more? Is there something else in his job description that I'm not aware of, or are there other tasks that he is supposed to do that I'm not aware of? Because you're basically saying he's doing what I am asking him to do. What else is there that he's supposed to do that I don't know, so that I can make sure I'm evaluating him properly? And that's how you start to corner people when they start to do things that are a bit unethical and they simply just do not make sense. Those are a couple of things that I would keep in mind. You know, one of the things we talk about, Robert, is making sure you have some data also, friend. So if he asks you questions specifically about his performance, you could easily say, oh, he's accomplishing this percentage of his metric and that percentage of his metric compared to his peers. He's doing very, very well, or etc. Have some numbers to support that. And I would say moving forward, you'll need to document your conversations, you know, whether you keep track of it in some type of way, you'll have to keep track, because this situation is one of those situations that could potentially escalate. And it sounds like a very, 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 very complex situation that you just may want to protect yourself on, so that you have done your part. You are not the person that is putting pressure on someone for no reason, because there's reasons you just can't do that to employees. You don't need to do that. So let me know what other questions you have specifically. Let me see. Robert also said, if against my manager, I may face some work issues. I would just, but and I missed that, Robert. I apologize about that, friend. That's the reason why you have human resources, because unless your human resources is not helpful, because there are human resources department out there that are not helpful. Yes, I did say that, and I do mean that. I know a lot of people say no, don't ever say human resources not helpful. I'm telling you, some of them sometimes they're not, but majority of them are, but sometimes they're not. I would, even if you have work issues, you still got to do the right thing, Robert. I've been in situations where I've had those ethical dilemmas, and you have to do the right thing, friend, because it will come back to haunt you at some point in time. If something ever happens to George and you were in a position where you had to give him extra work to do and something happens to him, you would never forgive yourself. And I do not believe in living life with regrets. And I just don't want you to be in that situation. There's ways to deal with your manager, just as I described. You'll have to really pin your manager down to say, what is it? What other metrics, what other KPIs is he supposed to meet that I'm not aware of, so I can make sure that he is doing what he's supposed to be doing along with everybody else. So think collectively as a team. Your manager is just not, he's just not acting like a good manager right now. Okay, so Ches said, I will talk with my manager before talking to supervisor just to get extra information. That sounds great, Ches. For your specific situation, gathering as much data as you can is so incredibly insightful for anyone when you're in any high stakes, high pressure situation. All of the things that we discussed tonight, Robert's situation, Chaz, we talked about your situation earlier this week. These are all very high stakes, high pressure situations, and you do want to gather as much information as possible. As I mentioned with Robert, it would be helpful whenever that time comes. You don't necessarily have to force it, but it's always good to find out what's the backstory that's going on with this particular situation. For example, when I've been in situations where there's been some politics playing on, being played, literally, a lot of it came down to funding. And when you think about money and politics and etc., one of the things that comes up a lot is that there is always some backstory. So you want to get as much information as you can from a reliable source as it relates to the backstory of the situation and what specifically is going on. So that when you are in your conversation or your very high pressured conversation, that you're coming from a place of knowledge, knowing that there's a backstory with this. And sometimes the backstory may change your perspective in terms of how you manage the situation or what is really the dynamics here. In Robert's case, you still want to do the right thing, but the backstory may give you some insight in terms of why is there such an issue. But I'll just share with you, specifically for Robert's case, is that your manager is not acting like a manager. And this is one of the reasons why people have bad bosses, they have toxic bosses, toxic work environments, and etc., because you have people that are in leadership roles that have not received training, or they just simply do not have the emotional stamina to deal with life as a leader and as a manager. And if they don't have it, then they simply do not need to be in those roles. But in the case of Robert specifically, his manager is very highly emotionally upset about George, wants George to obviously quit, is pressuring Robert to make George quit, and that's not right. No manager that is a decent manager would ever put their employee in a situation where they want to have their manager be in a situation where they're trying to basically fire somebody. That's like pretty much saying, I'm going to have you do my dirty work for you. And ultimately, no one wants to be in that situation. I would not encourage anyone to be in that situation. And you just have to be just very strategic in terms of how you communicate, but always keep it down to data and facts, because data, numbers will not lie. There, people try to make them lie, and people will try to alter data and etc. That's a topic for another day. But ultimately, you have to. It's really important to lead with facts in those specific situations, because you have someone that is highly emotional, but the facts are the facts at the end of the day. I don't, Robert, I really want you to keep me updated on that situation. Even if you're not able to join live, you send me a message either on Instagram, LinkedIn, or send me a comment on Facebook, or email me at info@excellence.org. Let me know how that goes. And Robert, you've been through a lot, friend. I mean, you've been through a lot of situations with the role that you're in. And as you elevate and as you go into those different roles and being promoted, you should really start to see how the wonderful world of leadership can really be. And especially when you're put in a really just very challenging situation like that for someone wanting you to do their dirty work. I don't like that. And I've been in situations where I've been in a situation where I was being used as an scapegoat for an issue, and it's happened to me a couple of times in my career. And it's so incredibly important that even if you've been in that situation, you have to really step up. So, let me give you an example. When I first started many, many years ago in a specific role, I won't say which one, but I was in an executive role. And when I started with this particular organization, what happened is that we were doing a lot of volume in terms of work, but the money was not being evenly distributed. So I was managing multiple locations, and all of the volume was coming out of one location. But for some reason, every month, even though we worked very hard, it would always show as the one main location was constantly losing money. And I was relatively new in this role. And this is something I'm sharing with you, Robert. Sometimes you just got to do the right thing. You have to do the right thing. And so I was new to this role, like brand new to this role. And I just was confused as to why are we working so hard? But it says every month I'm in the negative. Like, what is that? Like, I don't understand. I don't get it. I don't understand what's going on. I was already at an executive level role. I understand profit and loss. What is it exactly? And let me share with you what specifically was going on. Now, as I mentioned, I'm leading this particular part of an organization, and the money, it was always looking like my one department was losing money, and no one could tell me why. No one could tell me why. Now, what I ended up finding out is that the reason why the department was making money was something really, really simple. Really, really simple. And it was so simple that you're going to be shocked when I say it. The reason the department was making money is because somebody was being lazy. Yes, somebody was being lazy. What was happening is that even though I had multiple locations, and this is why I said I have to do the right thing, because I was in front of a board of directors, I just was hired on, and now I'm in a situation where it looks like I'm completely losing money. It doesn't look bad. It doesn't look good for me whatsoever. And I had to ask the hard question to someone in their finance team, and I said, like, "What's going on here? Like, I don't understand." So this is what happened. Instead of having each area, each department have their own pretty much profit and loss, so their own the salaries, their expenses, overhead, all those things you worry about when you're managing departments and businesses, etc. They had everybody's the other multiple offices that I had. Everything was coming out of the main office, so that all everybody's expenses were coming out of the main office, which is the reason why the main location always looked like it was losing money. When I asked a little bit further in detail in terms of, well, why is it this way? It was simply a laziness answer. They didn't want to separate everything out. They just wanted to make it easy for themselves so that all expenses come out of the one location. I had to clarify and say, this is not going to work. This is not going to work. This is killing my profit and loss. This is not accurate because it is depicting that this location is losing all of this money when in actuality, I have no idea if the location is losing money or not, because the expenses from the other three or four or five locations are all coming out of this one. That's not the way you run a business. You can't run a business like that. So I did some heavy conversations, some very difficult conversations, and told them, you have to split this up. You cannot have all of the bills for this entire department coming out of one location when there's other locations that need to have their own profit and loss. So we sat down and carved out everyone's salaries, who was going to be at this location, what point FTE, if you do not know what FTE is, full-time equivalent, that this person was, put their salaries or that percentage of their FTE allocated to this particular location, allocate to that particular location, order the supplies in a way to where the billing was not coming out of the one main location. Every particular office functioned as their own entity so we could understand their profit and loss. Now, what I could have done was could have just sat there and just waited and just let this ship continue to sink, because I just didn't know what to do. But the right thing for me to do was to say, you know what? Wait. something's not right here. Something's not right. And by doing that, friends, I was able to break everything out and find out that my department was actually making money. Sometimes you have to make those hard decisions to do the hard things. And Robert, I understand in your case when you're worried about, your manager and etc. I was in a situation where I was worried about my finance people, and I was worried about my finance people and my direct report at that direct person I was reporting to at that time. So I understand that pressure, but sometimes you just, I mean, not sometimes, all the time you need to do the right thing because it will come back and bite you. Now, if I would have done nothing and just let that slide and just kind of waited and just waited and waited, the department would have continued to lose money. And they would have looked at me as to, why did you hire this new person here to fix the issues of this department? And the department is basically essentially a sinking ship. This is the reason why you have to have those hard conversations and understand that your ability to be comfortable in uncomfortable situations professionally will help you to be able to stand out from everybody else, because most people are scared and they're very timid and afraid of what's going to happen if they say something when there's a situation going on that is ethically wrong. Now, in this case, this was an ethical issue because the information that was being presented was not accurate. And this is information that at that time was being presented to a board of directors, and it wasn't as accurate as it should have been. And it was all because someone just simply did not want to put in the extra work to be able to separate things out and make each location have their own separate profit and loss statement. If you manage businesses, or if you own that level of leadership where you have been responsible for profit and loss statements in terms of reviewing them and etc., you know exactly what I'm talking about. And you know how critically important your profit and loss statement is, and its accuracy or its inaccuracies will completely damage your reputation. It will hurt your business. It will just completely be catastrophic for you. So as I was saying, sometimes you have to make those hard decisions, and just know that you collect as much data as you can, as we were talking about with Chess earlier and with Robert. Collect your data so you understand the backstory. The reason why I found out they were being lazy is because I asked those questions to understand the backstory so I could understand what's going on. It's good when you ask more of those open-ended questions. If you ask more closed questions, meaning that closed questions are going to be those questions that either are a yes or a no, or maybe a maybe. You don't want to ask closed questions when you're trying to gather information. Ask those open-ended questions. The ones that we learn about in school. Who, what, when, where, and why. And those questions will always give you a little bit more information than simply saying a question that requires a yes or no response. So I hope that gives you some insight to consider. I really appreciate you so much, Robert, for bringing this situation to the lives today, because I know that's very complicated, and I can only imagine how stressful that is because you're dealing with your manager, you're dealing with a couple other things as well. Now, there's a few things that we've talked about previously as it relates to setting boundaries. To recap of what we discussed, when you think about your boundaries, the very first thing you have to do is you have to determine, what are your boundaries? What boundaries do you need to be successful and take care of yourself? We also talked about the delivery, so making sure that you are using your baseline in terms of how you communicate consistently on a day-to-day basis. It will help you out tremendously in terms of how you are speaking to other people. Also, having a structure, having some kind of structure to say, thank you for having time to meet with me, or allocating time to meet with me. Here are a couple of things that I need to discuss. As we talked about previously, always have some numbers, always have some data in your back pocket. You need some data in your back pocket at all times for anything that you're working on, because when you are someone that can speak in a way to where you're very calm and you can talk about numbers and data, it automatically elevates you as a leader, because most people don't really think of numbers off the top of their head because they just simply don't. That's the reason why you subscribe to this channel and follow my content here, because I will share with you secrets that a lot of people do not talk about that will automatically help you to be at that next level than your peers. Now, we talked about setting boundaries, how to set those boundaries. If you want to go into a lot more detail, Definitely take a look at any videos that I talk about managing your emotions under pressure or having difficult conversations. Any of those videos will give you some really solid insights in terms of things you can do when those situations come up that might be a bit more difficult for you to be able to navigate them. But I hope this gives you something to work with in terms of developing your boundaries. How can you start having that conversation, etc. We talked a lot about different scenarios that came up specifically in Robert's case. We've talked about Chez's case. We're waiting to hear what happens back with Chez. I hope all goes well and that you get some insight in terms of the project management challenges that you're experiencing right now. There's so many things that I want to share with you all, but really one of the most important strategies I can give to you is to learn how to read people. This is something that will completely change your life. And if you can start learning how to read people, you will learn a lot about what's being said and what's being not said, and how you can adjust your message in real time based on what is being said. And this is one of the reasons why people sometimes struggle with thinking on your feet. There's a lot that goes into thinking on your feet. And if you are in a leadership position and you need some support with this, then you're always welcome to contact me at exciteexcellence.org. I'll be happy to support you in any way that I can. But reading people will help you to know what people are not wanting to say, even though they are thinking it. And that in itself will give you a completely unique advantage as a high stakes communicator from everybody else, because most of your managers and your leaders, they don't have these skills. They probably do not. Most people do not, which is the reason why I heavily focus on this specifically for the channel. Now, as I mentioned, there's a couple things that are coming out. I'm working actually this weekend on my landing page for the mini ebook I've mentioned to everyone that talks about communicating under pressure. There is a high stakes communication assessment there that gives you a bit more of a glance in terms of the specifics of communicating, in terms of what you may be doing really well, what are some areas you may want to improve upon. It gives you a score so you have something to work with. And based on your results, you can go in a couple directions. You can either work with me to have a strategy session so we can develop a overall game plan to help you tackle some of those challenges, or you can migrate into my high stakes communication intensive, which is a transformative program that will completely change your life. We go through It's the most surgical analysis of how you communicate you will ever have. We go through videos on terms of how you communicate specifically. What are the things you're doing that are really, really great? And then what are the things you're doing that may be detracting away from your message or causing your confidence not to appear as strong as it needs to be? We go through pressure tests. Many people talk about, I don't know how to really respond, or I don't know how to not freeze when I'm in the hot seat. Well, I'm going to put you in the hot seat. So, in the hot seat, in a simulation, I will be able to at least be able to interact with you in a way to help you to get into that hot seat mentality. Therefore, when that time comes up for you and you are actually in the hot seat, your response is like a reflex. It's not a matter of, I don't know what to say. It is, oh, I know exactly what to say and how to handle this. I'm also adding learning how to read people. This is something that is a very, very much of a strategy that, as I mentioned, will change your life. This is something that will help you too. We have a lot of touch points in between there. It is really the most, thank you for the heart emojis. This is one of those situations where you can be at a place in your career where you know you need to grow, or maybe you're struggling. A lot of it will come down to your communication. Everyone that's following my content, you all are very highly educated people, I can tell, because the content and the titles I put here are not content about, random stuff. I know you all are very educated and very intelligent, and I want to be able to help you become even sharper. And how you do that is by how you communicate. And if you can communicate at a higher level, you can absolutely gain more insight, more revenue, etc. I know right now for my clients, I think working with them as a whole, I've been able to help them increase their salaries at least by $250,000, at least, all by the way that they communicate, which is the reason why this is such a big, big mission for me because I know if I can help you communicate at that next level, you can share that information to someone else, they can share it to someone else. And so we can start to create individuals, those very, very elite individuals that know how to communicate under pressure instead of being the average person that knows how to communicate but doesn't really know how to communicate under pressure. Similar to Robert's boss. Robert's boss does not know how to communicate under pressure because he's passing that pressure off to Robert unfairly, which is not the right way to do it. So I appreciate you all so much for being here. If you have any questions specifically, whether you're watching live or you are watching the replay, you're always welcome to put it in the comments below because I want to support you. Please come to me with the hard things. So the hard situations, the complicated situations you have going on, that is my expertise. Anything easy, of course, I will be able to give you some insight there. And if there's something I'm not entirely familiar about, I will let you know. But when it comes to communication, I can probably get you in a very good place. But come to me with the things that are really bothering you, the challenges you're facing, and I will give you the time that I can to support you any way that I can here on the channel. This is obviously with the group as a whole in terms of the World Wide Web on YouTube. So there's only but so much I can do with you here in a group setting. Sometimes we just have to dive deep into you specifically to help you be able to communicate at that higher level. But I appreciate Robert for being here today. I appreciate Chad for being here today. You all know when I'm live, I'm here to help you. And Friday nights is when we do a little bit more Q&A. And so I'm looking forward to seeing you all next week when I go live. If anything comes up for you and you have any questions specifically, or any challenges you're facing, let me know in the comments below, please. Let me know. Let me know how I can support you and help you on your journey. I will see you all in the next video.